Welcome, everybody, to this overview of the Australian Internet Observatory. I'm Julian Thomas. I'm the program lead for the AIO, and I'm a professor of media and communication at RMIT University. So thank you for joining us. We'll have in this presentation three of my colleagues in the observatory, Nick Carah, Dan Angus, and Amanda Lawrence, talking through some of the things that the observatory offers researchers. And we'll have a chance for you all to ask questions and for us to respond. This event is in webinar format, and so we're asking you, if you wouldn't mind, to put your questions in the chat, and we'll have time to address those at the end of the session. And also just to note that we are recording this webinar for others to access if they can't come in at this time. I wanted to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting, where I'm speaking in Naarm, Melbourne. It's the Wurundjeri people of the Eastern Kulin Nations. But we want to acknowledge the traditional owners throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present, and we want to extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Just to begin with some basic information about the AIO, it is the result of a collaborative partnership involving universities, RMIT, QUT, UQ, the University of Melbourne, Swinburne University and Deakin, with the Australian Research Data Commons, the ARDC, and it's funded through ARDC as a collaborative partnership with funding from NCRIS, the National Research Infrastructure Program for Australia. It's one of a number of focus areas that are being managed as the HAS and Indigenous Research Data Commons program by the ARDC. And you can see on that slide the other programs that we're working with. So it's part of a suite of complementary emerging research infrastructure facilities that are addressing the needs of the humanities, social science and Indigenous research data communities. So it's a very brief background to who we are and how this works. I'll hand over to Dan for the substantive part of the webinar.
Thank you so much, Julian. And thanks everyone for being here today. So yes, as Julian said, what AIO purports to address within our research environment is to look at the platforms, the digital ecosystems that we use in our everyday life. So everything from news media through to the advertising we receive through many ads, through many platforms we use, platforms for learning and research, connection with community, through to everything through cyber safety and security and surveillance, and of course businesses and commerce and others. And it's through these platforms that we are very much living our daily lives, encountering new challenges perhaps, and where a lot of our research is now situated. And so access to this data is crucial for understanding our general attitudes, how things are happening within our lived environments, becoming personalized, and of course calling out where there are issues perhaps for harm or things that we need to understand more. The kinds of data that we can access through digital platforms are vast. And they're not just the things that we create. So not just for us, say, when we're sharing an Instagram post or making a tweet or something like that. It's very much the things that are known about us by platforms through our interaction. It's also the kinds of decisions that are being made around the order and the preferences in how, say, things like advertising or kind of any kind of content is preferenced within our feeds. And then it's also at much more deeper level metadata. So things that are known about the devices that we're using to connect, and the decisions that are being made around our logins and everything else within that space. So yes, within all of this information, much of this is gettable. We can get at this with, say, standard research methods, but a lot of it is not. And a lot of it is hidden from us for commercial reasons or for other reasons, but it's still crucial for us to be able to do our research. And for any of you who know me well, you know I've fought for many years to try and push this envelope, and AIO is the latest iteration of this, where we're really trying to push to get access to data that in some cases platforms really don't want us accessing. And that's not necessarily for legitimate reasons. It's to hide things that we think, and many researchers obviously in the field think are necessary for us to understand our platform environment better. And so what we have seen in the last years is platform access get increasingly more difficult with the closure of key platforms, shutdown of APIs. So I don't have to go through an enumerated list. I think many of you know the challenges facing data access more broadly. And so, yes, so the environment that we operate in now is one where it is increasingly difficult to access data and interaction data from commercial platforms. But we absolutely need this. We need this probably more than ever to understand our contemporary social life. And yes, APIs can and have been useful for getting a lot of data, but we need to think beyond APIs. We're very much in a post-API moment where we know that these are brittle infrastructures, and we need to, of course, look at other methods as well to gain access to data that's crucial for our research. And so this is very much the challenge set out for us. It's not our own in Australia. This is, in fact, an international challenge, and one that AO is really proud to embark on with a collection of other key international partners distributed across the entire globe. We're really fortunate as well that, you know, through AIO, we've seen research already that's been able to inform our own government processes. So, in fact, the most recent report that was released in March, looking at the integrity in the climate change environment, particularly around climate change communication, made a recommendation specifically about the importance of infrastructure like AIO in terms of being able to actually track these hidden digital influence ecosystems and to provide that necessary observability, that transparency and accountability of platforms. And so this is already an early indication of the importance of this. But just to kind of make sure I note that this is something that we're absolutely working both nationally and internationally in making sure we address this and connect our efforts with those other networks. I'd like to pass over now to Amanda to actually go through a little bit more about functionally and unpacking AIO itself and how we governed and structured.
Thanks, Dan. So yeah, our approach to solving some of these problems and making the most of this opportunity is the Australian Internet Observatory, which, as Julian mentioned, is national research infrastructure for observing digital platforms and social data. So there's four core pillars to the Internet Observatory: an overall governance and data management strategy, looking at developing the system architecture, but also the ethics and the data management protocols that we need to think about. There's an outreach and training program because we realize this is a really new area, and we need to upskill the community. And the key part of the infrastructure that we're building is for data sourcing through a variety of methods, which we're going to go into a bit more detail today, and a research program platform where you can come in, establish your project, look at recruitment, work with colleagues, and do some level of data analysis. So that's our four core areas. As part of the sort of setting up of the project over the last year, we did a survey of what researchers are interested in, what kind of platforms, what sort of media types, and what kind of research questions. So the big ones are the social media platforms, Instagram and TikTok, they've got the most interest, YouTube, Facebook and Meta, but then a lot of interest in generative AI tools coming along, and then Reddit and news sites and messaging and various other sort of platforms. What we also have found is, while not large, there is an interest in more obscure platforms as well for particular research projects. And then text is the most important, valuable, needed, media data type, but also images, metadata, video, and audio and voice. So something that we're really aware of is the multimodal type of material that we get now from internet platforms. And we also, the next slide, thanks, Nick. We also asked people what methods they are using, and web scraping is being used a lot, which is able to be used at a sort of small scale. And then there is a lot of interest in data donations, this new method that we're going to talk about shortly, APIs, which have been a long-standing method for a long time, website archiving, and looking at existing data sets are less important. So the methods that we are going to talk about particularly today is thinking about platform-centric and user-centric, and we're going to really focus on user-centric. But if we think about platform-centric, where the data is there and through some sort of access, either directly through web scraping or through application programming interfaces, APIs, you can get access to the back end. Where you can get a lot of data that way, but it's not necessarily tied to particular users. So the user-centric model, which we'll talk a bit more today, is the data donation in particular. So with that, we're looking at data download packages, screen capture, and browser extension methods. So the data download packages and the screen capture are sort of two ways of getting at data donation. So we're kind of thinking about this in terms of collected data packages, observed data packages, and downloaded data packages. Next slide, thanks, Nick. So data donation is defined as the act of a person actively consenting to donate or transfer their personal data to a specific cause or a research project. And it's got a number of benefits in that it provides access to individuals. It can be integrated well with other research methods. And you can also talk to the individuals who've donated about their data and use it as a way of getting insights for them as well. And as I mentioned, there's three main approaches, the screen capture and the browser extension, which we're sort of thinking as a similar approach. And then there's the data download packages. So we're going to go into more detail on those. So I think I'll hand over to Nick now to do that.
Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the approaches to data download packages that we're developing in the AIO and will shortly have available for researchers in the research community to use. So I'll sort of start at the very beginning and define more clearly what a data download package is, and then take you through the kind of AIO workflow for engaging with these. So a data download package is basically a collection of files that a digital platform provides to a user and enables you as an individual to download and extract from the platform. And it contains personal information about you and your use of that platform. It's usually delivered as a zip file with structured data inside of varying kinds. The DDPs are created by platforms and reflect how those platforms choose to both store user data and then provide it to users. In some jurisdictions, platforms are legally required to give users access to their personal data. And to a large degree, this is where DDPs have kind of come from as something that's readily available to users of digital platforms. So particularly in the EU under the GDPR, individuals have a right to access personal data about them, and that platforms must provide it to them in a structured, commonly used machine-readable format. And so that kind of gives a standardized way for people to go to a platform, request information, and then receive it in this structured way. And then that relationship that forms between an individual who has retrieved data about themselves from a platform and a researcher who they then choose to donate that data to as part of a research project is one that's kind of made possible by these legal conventions or regulatory conventions that require platforms to make data downloadable by users. So how this works in practice is an individual user of a digital platform. It could be Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, any other digital service you use. You can visit that platform and usually somewhere in your settings find a tool or an option where you can request your personal information. There's usually a few options to choose from inside the interface of the platform about what information you request, and then you submit a request And typically the platform doesn't let you then download that information straight away. They process it and you wait for some period of time to be sent a link that then you click and you can then download your DDP. That can sometimes happen almost instantaneously, and sometimes that can take hours or even days. Sometimes because of the scale of data you're requesting. If you're requesting everything that you've ever uploaded to Instagram and you've been on Instagram for a decade, that might be a very large file. But sometimes platforms appear to at least deliberately elongate this request. Usually then what you're provided is a zip file that contains all sorts of things, structured data, like CSV and JSON files, but also media files that contain images, videos, audio that you might have created and uploaded into a platform. So this can be both very personal and very rich data, and very kind of historical data if you've been on that platform for a long period of your life. Why are GDPs interesting and what's their value in the research community? Well, they're an extremely novel and rich data source that provides a lot of longitudinal depth in terms of both people's own practices and biographies, but also in terms of platforms and how platforms operate. The data you provide can give us a sense, or the data that platforms provide about you can give us a sense of, if you like, the raw inputs that platform algorithms use. So for example, on a platform like Instagram, your DDP might contain every image you've ever posted to your profile, which is in a sense provides a very rich biography of your life for as long as you've been posting on that platform. But it'll also say contain a list of all of the words that the platform's ad model has created about you to describe your interests and preferences. And so this gives us a sense of how, some of the key inputs into the algorithmic ad model of the platform and its recommendation algorithms. So these DDPs can give us an account both of what it is that people do on digital media platforms, but also how digital platforms, algorithmic and automated models work, how they classify, recommend, sort people and content. There are a range of challenges and limitations of working with DDPs, particularly to highlight a few of them. There's no standardized way of providing DDPs among platforms. It'd be wonderful if we had this, but we find that platforms create all sorts of different conventions for providing DDPs, and that even within particular platforms, they aren't very stable. So if you take a platform like Meta, Facebook and Instagram constantly changing certain categories in the data, and it can be a real game of, in a sense, cat and mouse to figure out why data is changing and what it means. So you get this huge variance both across platforms and within platforms in content and formats. We discover as we work with research participants that our DDPs, perhaps unsurprisingly, contain a lot of sensitive and personal information that can be things like your personal message histories. It might be videos you've been served over a long period of time on YouTube or TikTok that might reveal, say, your preferences or some of your search histories. And sometimes it can be things that infer intimate information. So in one of our large studies, the Australian Ad Observatory, we find that sometimes the kinds of ads people are being served in a particular period of life can really say quite intimate things, say about health conditions they have or personal experiences that they're having. So this information, because it's in a sense so rich and so longitudinal, can be very sensitive and requires a lot of care and diligence on the part of researchers. It's not, in a sense, publicly publishable data. This is, I want to take you through now the AIO workflow. So this is how AIO's DDP data donation platform looks and how it operates. We have a number of researchers using this platform at the moment, and we'll be making it and launching it later in the year as a public tool that researchers in the research community can use. So what happens is researchers would log on to the AIO and they register their data donation project, which means that they create a project, they explain what it's about, they provide their ethics information, and then they set up their instructions about what information they're seeking from a particular platform. And then they configure their DDP donations. So say they're doing a study and they'd like people to donate information about their use of TikTok. They'd set that up by registering the project, and then they'd configure in TikTok's DDP what particular information do they want participants to donate. And the way our platform works is it will only let people donate information from their DDP that we know we want. And that provides a really strong protective safeguard that people cannot accidentally donate to us personal and intimate information without realizing. Researchers then send a link through to participants, a data donation link that invites them to participate in the study, and that provides them with both information about the study, connection through to ethics protocols, but also instructions on how to go and request their DDP and then upload it back to the researchers. So once they have that data donation link, participants can then enroll in the study, read the instructions, and go off and request their DDP. Once they receive it from the platform, they come back to the AIO, to the project, and they can upload their DDP and have an opportunity to review the information that's in it. They can choose to uncheck information that they don't want to share with the researchers. And then if they're happy to continue on, they can then submit and share that data and donate it through to that research project. And that DDP then just sits inside that researcher's research project in the AIO. It's not shared any more broadly than that. And so this workflow would enable researchers in Australia to conduct studies on a whole range of platforms that offer DDPs, enable them to create their own projects, engage with their own participants, and have them safely and securely donate data. We then are developing a series of tools that follow that moment that enable researchers to explore, to visualize, and to analyze the data in participants' DDPs. And so if you're interested in this next step, once you receive DDPs, what's in them, then you'll see on the link here on the screen, you can go through to our DDP visualization platform. And this is actually a really useful tool if you're DDP curious, you're thinking of doing a research study. What we encourage researchers to do is go and download your own DDP from that platform and upload it in our visualizer. It doesn't donate it to us. It just enables you to explore that data. And so if you upload your YouTube DDP or your Instagram DDP, you can then visualize and explore the kinds of information that you would find in there. And that it really enables you to think through, if you had a whole research study of participants donating this information, whether that would help you answer the kinds of research questions and problems that you're working on. So that link there is open for anyone to explore, and I think maybe we'll try and get that posted in the chat as well. As I've indicated, we have a number of researchers who are working on early versions of these DDP workflows with us. At QUT, Dan and his colleagues, Patrick Wickstrom, Jean Burgess, and others are working on a ARC discovery project on TikTok, where people have been donating their TikTok DDPs. And that's enabling researchers to examine the recommendation algorithms of TikTok and see what kinds of videos people are seeing on their For You pages. In the Australian Ad Observatory, a project that I'm working on with Dan, Angus, and many other colleagues, we ask people to donate their DDPs from platforms that have their ad interest data. So what kinds of information advertisers are uploading about them into the platform, or that the platform is creating about them to help fuel the recommendation engine of the advertising model. So there are a range of different kinds of research topics and questions that we can get at by exploring DDPs and asking people to donate them to us. That's DDPs. I'm now going to hand over to another part of the AIO's infrastructure, which is the screen capturing for mobile. And for that, I'll hand over to Dan.
Thanks so much, Nick. So yeah, there's quite a few questions coming in the chat, and please keep those coming. We will come back to them in the Q&A, particularly around the ethics of DDPs, which is absolutely an obvious and very important question. For the screen capture for mobile, so we've been pioneering a radically new approach that allows us to capture data directly from participants' mobile phones. So as we know, mobile phones are where a lot of activity happens now within our digital environments. We've moved away from using desk-based laptops and desktops, and very much engaging often with the kind of this digital environment through our phones. And if you go to the next slide, please, Nick. The way in which we've developed or proposed to study this is through this new mobile screen capture app, which we've initially developed for advertising, but can be tuned, as I'll explain, for capturing other forms of content. Now, a real key part of this is, and back to that question of ethics, is a lot of screen capture technologies up to this time have enabled the capture of material on mobile phones, but it's immediate transmission at time of capture to some kind of central point for processing, often through the guise of saying, oh, we submit that data to our central kind of secure server, we process, and then we kind of, clean up the data and extract what we need. We take a slightly different approach, which is far more privacy preserving, which is, as you can see here, here, when someone has got this app installed on their phone, and the app is available through the Google Play Store, so it is vetted also by the platform providers, and there are very, very strict processes around getting an app actually approved through the App Store itself, which we of course have to submit to. The app itself is in a state where it's essentially in the background waiting for a trigger point, which is the opening of an app which is of interest in the research itself. So in this case, you see there's someone, they open up their Chrome browser on their Android device, they then close that, they go to a Photos app, and it's not until they open Facebook in this case that the system wakes up and then starts recording. Now, noting at this point, all those recordings are stored locally on that device and are not moved off device up until there is such a time that we've processed out the material of interest. If you can go to the next slide, Nick, I'll explain that. So basically, that's kind of another way of showing what I've just shown you, where we have a mobile device. The app is alive on the phone, and these MP4 files are being recorded, stored in a cache at the back end. What happens then, we sample it on device and use an inference model called YOLO that then is trained specifically to look for the media object of interest. In this case, we've tuned it specifically for ads. So to look for ads, to find them, and then once ads have been discovered on that device, they're then packaged and sent to that secure server at the back end, but only at that point where we're satisfied that this is in fact an ad. So yeah, absolutely, go to the next slide. Thanks, Nick. So YOLO is an inference model that you can train as a one-shot learning platform for other forms of media as well. So the idea here is to tune this for advertising, but this is a general purpose piece of infrastructure that could be tuned for, say, detecting news content or other forms of content that might be of interest to you as a researcher to detect when your participants are using their phones, be able to record something of interest from that. And so in this case, what you see is the inference model itself has been tuned on examples of advertising to be able to actually know when it sees an ad. If you go to the next slide, Nick, I'll show those examples. So ads, as we know, appear in a wide variety of formats. So you have everything from story ads, marketplace ads, reel ads, footer ads, and such across a number of platforms. So this is not just Facebook. This is Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and there are others that we're putting through their paces right now as well and collecting examples. And so the point here is that each of these has a particular visual marker, and we can tune this YOLO system to recognize those visual signatures, know that that is an advert, and then use that to actually extract it from that visual feed. And then at that point, once we're convinced and the model has reached a threshold that it's convinced that that is in fact an ad, that's the point at which it's sent off the device into our secure back end. Once that, there's an example of that kind of on the next slide. Thanks, Nick. So you can see here a user is scrolling, you see some personal information there, but then it's only at the point where it scrolls onto the ad, you see these are the sections of that MP4 that have been extracted that actually show that ad itself. Now, of course, this comes with limitations. With some of those, you see there might be a bit grainy or a bit stretched. And so part of the real sophistication of this approach is some of the back-end processing then to actually recompose the ad from all of those snippets as well. And there's a brilliant amount of engineering that Abdul Abeid and Dan Tran and others have put into that to make sure that we actually have the highest quality version of that ad as possible sent to our servers. If you go to the next slide, thanks, Nick. So yeah, from the user's perspective, there's an assurance there as well through the user dashboard. So at any point, the participants from their side can see what ads have been donated, so they can review that and know the exacting details of what has been sent from that app. We haven't had any instances of non-ads being transmitted of concern. We have had some instances where maybe a tiny section of or some other kind of material slightly around the edges has been transmitted, but so far that the number of false positives has been incredibly minuscule thanks to this approach. But in any case, those participants can see that, review it themselves, and know what has been transmitted off their device onto our servers. Another key part of this, you see there's an activation code at the top. we've kind of made sure that the app itself is set there as something that's quite independent from the research study. And so the research study design can involve, say, surveys or other forms of participant involvement. And how we actually then link data is via that unique activation code. So we could, say, send our participants, as we have through the Ad Observatory, a survey to fill out and have them provide their unique activation code. And that allows us to connect that profile data to the ad stream that's coming in. And that's another step that means that we're quarantining that user data away from the ad flows. So even if through all of the ways in which we've protected that data stream of ads going off device was able to be intercepted, you wouldn't actually have any other personal identifying information attached to those ads because those things are quarantined as separate processes. Next slide. Thanks, Nick. And so then when the data comes into the dashboard, into our database, we provide access to researchers through this dashboard. And so Dan Tran is very much the architect of this one, with support from others. And this is an amazing resource, actually, in and of itself, that we're going to be using this as a model for other forms of data analysis as well across not just ads, but it allows our researchers to go through, tag ads of interest, look through the metadata, connect that with some of the profile information so we can look at ads seen by particular demographics, and really go to town on looking through those ads and making sense of them, querying what can often be, databases now of thousands, tens of thousands of ads of interest that we've gathered from individuals. And then, of course, package these in certain ways for, ongoing data export for, analyzing things at different scales. Thanks, Nick. Next. I think it's over to you.
Yep, over to me. Thanks, Dan. So I'm going to offer a case study of a large project we've been working on, the Australian Ad Observatory, that uses AIO infrastructure. And really just to talk about that study in terms of the range of data donation approaches that the study uses and brings together. So the Australian Ad Observatory is a study that's been running since 2021, I think. And in its first phase, used a browser extension where people would install a browser plugin on their browser, and then when they were on Facebook, would extract ads from their newsfeed and donate them to us as researchers. In the current phase of the study, we're using the mobile app that Dan just showed us. And so people install the mobile app on their phone and switch it on, and then they go and they're invited to complete an onboarding survey where they enter that 6-digit alphanumeric code from the app, and that enables us to link the donations coming through from their instance of the app to their survey responses. And then we also ask them to go, if they want to, and download a DDP from Instagram or Facebook. And that DDP, what we just asked them to donate to us is their ad interest data, which are words that the ad model creates to describe them, and a list of advertisers that have uploaded personal information about them into Meta's ad system. So we're there combining a range of DDP tools together with some more traditional humanities and social sciences research instruments. So we have them complete a survey which tells them all sorts of tells us things about them, and then we can link that with the ads they donate to us, and we can link that with the information that platforms are creating about them and that they're able to access through their data download package. And in doing that, we're able to then create a very kind of rich portrait of what online advertising looks like in Australia, how it differs for different kinds of Australians, and also how the model operates, because we're able to look at both the patterns of ads that people are seeing and then relate those patterns to both who they are in terms of what they've told us on the survey, but also relate them to the kinds of information that the ad model is creating about them. So we can see, if there are, say, correlations between the ad model creating interest relating to things like alcohol or gambling and the kinds of ads they see in their feed, or if we're seeing particular kinds of advertisers upload personal information about them, and those being the advertisers that then are appearing in their feeds. Additionally, and this is maybe the final part of the project that we also want to draw attention to and encourage researchers to think about, is that at one level, data donation allows for quite large scale analysis. So in a project like the Ad Observatory, in the first phase, we were donated over 700,000 ads. In the current phase, I think we're tracking toward over 300,000 ads. And so that enables us to really analyze advertising at a scale in Australia that really is fairly unique in the digital era. But what we also pay a lot of attention to in this project is how donated data enables very close and situated forms of co-analysis with participants. And so the dashboard that we use to monitor the collection of ads, we also use as a tool in interview settings where we're able to bring up an instance of the dashboard that just shows the ads an individual participant has donated to us. And then we can do a co-analysis interview where participants, in a sense, walk us through their donations and help us interpret the patterns of ads that they're receiving in their everyday life. In another related study we've been doing on DDPs, we've been working in a pilot study with people donating to us DDPs from a range of social media platforms they use. And then again, we're doing interviews where we walk through those data donations and get people to help us interpret that data, both what it means for them, but also where they consider that data to be kind of personal or sensitive, to really understand those dimensions of this kind of data much better. And so I think that maybe to kind of finish up this case study, to say that in my sense, the kinds of tools and approaches we're developing the AIO enables, I think, HAS researchers to do research about digital platforms at a kind of macro scale that's been relatively inaccessible to many researchers in the field. But I also think these tools enable us to continue those very important and rich kind of modes in humanities and social science research of doing very situated work with people in their everyday lives and experiences. In this case, say, being able to do interviews that are really underpinned by the kind of richness of the data that they're able to extract from platforms, and enable you to kind of really explore that together. So I think I might leave it there so that we can I can hand back, I think, to. Oh no, I've got one more thing to say, and then I'll hand back, which is just to make another to offer just a kind of final illustrative point about the very rich nature of this data. These are some of the ads, for example, we've seen in the second phase of the ad observatory relating to people's personal health experiences, health and sexuality. And it gives you a sense, I think, of how advertising can engage with a whole range of aspects of people's lives. And it's when we take up some of these collections of ads with people in interviews that we really get a sense of how that advertising is very situated in relation to their personal experiences of their health, their bodies, the way they're being profiled by automated models, and so on. And so maybe just to reiterate the point there, that we operating at those levels of an observatory enabling us to have a kind of larger view of advertising as a cultural form, complemented by these very situated forms of engagement with Australians about their experiences of digital platforms and services. I think I'll pause there and hand back to you, Julian, as chair. Oh, but I see on this slide I've got one more thing to say, which is, I'll leave this slide up for a moment to say that we're conducting interviews with researchers who are interested in using AIO or doing research about digital platforms and interested in the kind of themes we are. And if you'd like to participate in that developmental research, it'd be wonderful if you contacted Kelly Vella in our team for more information about that work that we're doing. I'll hand back to you, Julian, now for Q&A.
Thanks, Nick, and thank you, and Dan and Amanda for giving us that very clear overview of some of the kind of key capabilities of the AIO platform. So we've got some terrific questions in the chat. Thanks everybody for putting those in. And Amanda, I think you've been looking through them. We can you might direct these to us in different ways or answer them yourself.
Thanks, Julian. There were a few questions sort of circling around the ethics issue. So we could probably look at them together. So one was about informed consent from a user perspective, which sort of also combines, I think, with a really quite tricky issue, which is the capacity to consent given the amount of material that you might be handing over. And and so what that looks like for a participant perspective. And then there was another question about ethics templates, which we maybe can get to after, if we want to have a think about those, that capacity to consent piece.
I'm happy to start there, Amanda, because it's something that we've been thinking about a lot with Lauren Hayden, a research fellow in the AIO, and Michael Esteban, one of our developers, and others in terms of the data donation workflow. And there are two kind of really important design features we've been thinking about here. One is that this principle that when researchers have set up a project, they upload a version of the DDP into the project to begin with so that they can very carefully go through it and understand what kind of data they're asking people to donate, and then select very specifically the kinds of data categories that they would be willing to accept data from people so that we can kind of, immediately remove categories that we know to be personal, like messages or images that people might have created themselves or whatever it might be for that study. And that effectively makes it technically impossible for someone to donate information from any of those categories in the DDP, even though they will have downloaded it when they then upload it into our platform will ignore it. And then secondly, when participants go and get their DDP and bring it back to us, there's an important kind of visualizer step where participants are able to open up and explore the kind of data that's in there. And I think that's where we continue to do the work that I think you're pointing to, is that sometimes if someone's been on a platform for a very long time, there's lots of information there. And I think the judgment that we're asking participants to make is about really that category of information and whether they can make a good judgment about what it's likely to contain. So for someone, videos they might have been served on TikTok, they might consider to be a relatively benign kind of data, but for someone else, they might consider that to be very personally revealing. And so I think these are very situated judgments that people make. And then thirdly, I think we're becoming increasingly aware that a lot of DDP research requires some level of engagement with participants at a certain stage of the research around how they interpret and understand the information that they're donating to you, and whether that's through surveys or interviews or co-analysis steps. But I think these methods will be very important to researchers in the field from a kind of ethics point of view.
And if I can just jump on the back of that, Nick, I agree. I mean, they're all very excellent points, of course. There's another thing that DDPs do offer us as researchers, though, which is a degree of reciprocity that wasn't necessarily available and hasn't been available through some of the methods in which we have collected data historically. So when we've utilized perhaps a lot of the platform-based APIs or scrape data from platforms, we've often done it without explicit user consent. And so we've done this thing where we've said, oh, look, it's kind of in public, and so therefore it's fair game. Whereas with DDPs, it forces you to absolutely have to have that very much that personal one-to-one relationship with your subject to kind of walk them through these the forms of data that they may be able to upload, to talk through that, but to also build in forms of reciprocity that haven't really been available to us when it's come to more of those other forms of historical data collection that we have done in the field. And I give a practical example of this. The AIO, in the very, very early stages, we took a lot of this to the Woodford Folk Festival. And so we ran a stall there where we offered people to, participate in research by donating forms of their data through one of our early prototype platforms. But what we offered back was a form of like a whimsical data reading, right? Where we actually gave people a kind of a deck of cards which formed some form of explanation about the kind of data that they were giving to us. But what we also found is in those moments where people were agreeing to hand over a form of data, these were simple things like what shows they might have watched on Netflix or the kinds of materials they'd consumed on TikTok. We were able to have conversations with them. And a lot of the publics that were coming through were just more interested in having that conversation with researchers in these spaces to talk about how, their perspective on the platforms and to kind of learn more about the research that we're doing. And that's a really, really rich setting to be able to connect quite authentically with those participants. And so in that sense, like some of the data donation processes, they can be kind of playful, but they're very engaging. And I think it offers us pathways to really think more creatively about the relationship we can have with those data subjects, and really open up possibilities. But of course, be guided through that through a strong sense of ethics and care around what we do with that data.
Can I, Amanda, before you move on, I know there are other questions people ask, but just to explore this area a little bit more, I think it might be useful for us to clarify a little bit about the nature of AIO as research infrastructure. So we've been talking about a number of research projects where we've used the AIO tools or helped to develop them, and we've been wanting to show you examples of how it can be useful. But we are building research infrastructure rather than wanting to conduct extensive projects. We're not building AIO in order to undertake our own research. These are intended to be tools for the research community. I mean, Nick, would you be able to sort of say a little bit more about that difference and what that means for the division of labour that we think makes sense when it comes to things like seeking ethics approval? What kinds of things can AIO help researchers with in terms of dealing with these privacy and ethics issues? And what sorts of things will researchers do for themselves?
Yeah, thanks, Julie. You kind of read my mind a little bit about. I was thinking about this same distinction. These ethical questions about that really sit with us as researchers are ones we need to deal with in our own research projects and our own research protocols at our university. And it's like the researchers take carriage for that, and then they come and use the AIO as infrastructure. So the AIO itself won't be doing research projects or collecting data. What the AIO is infrastructure that enables researchers to go and do that. And so I think where the AIO though really comes into this is through our kind of outreach and training agenda, developing rich materials and ways of engaging with the research community so that you can really understand the kinds of ethical issues that researchers encounter when they use these data donation approaches. And then from a kind of engineering and design point of view, developing an infrastructure where the interfaces and tools and workflows really enable researchers to both, researchers and their participants, I should say, to really both understand the kinds of data that they're requesting and donating and working with, but also at each step to be able to visualize and explore that data to understand from a researcher point of view and from a participant point of view what's in here, what's being donated, what does it look like, so that we as infrastructure, in a sense, enable researchers to have good ethical practices. And I think that the AIO and researchers are in a sort of relationship here where over time, as HAS disciplines broadly defined, we'll be developing more mature understandings of the kinds of ethical issues you encounter when you want to go and do research about how digital platforms are affecting our lives, our societies, and that can be for everything from very public macro issues like politics to very intimate issues like your own personal health circumstances, for example. And so, maturing that develops means both having the infrastructure to enable good practices, but also researchers, as they always do, taking responsibility for their own ethical protocols and ensuring that they're fit for purpose and the kind of work they're doing.
Thanks, Nick. Amanda, you've posted a link in our chat to the guide that we've produced for researchers who might be interested in AIO and the kinds of information that we can provide them to enable them to proceed with ethics applications. Do you want to say anything more about it?
No, just to thank Carah, who's on the call, and some of the other team members who've been working on this area. And this is an ongoing program for us of work. But yeah, as Nick said, we are expecting that researchers will need to be thinking about their protocols and their ethics applications, but we're here to try and sort of support that process. So it's another question came in, which is, can any researcher use AIO? And I think that's I guess, how my opportunity to talk about where we're going next with being able to provide both self-service and also support larger projects. Anyone want to take that on?
You
Yeah,
go,
I'm
Nick, if you want.
happy to pick that up. So there's the way we're thinking about it is that there are different levels of research need in the research community, and we've done a lot of work internally thinking about that. So, in some cases, there are very large scale, well-funded, multi-year projects at the level of, say, an ARC Discovery project or a Center of Excellence project, that might want to use AIO infrastructure and be involved in a fairly, I guess you could say, thick relationship with the AIO. And then there are researchers who are just doing an individual project, maybe a PhD project, and they want to be able to use the AIO in a more self-service way. So certainly, as we're heading toward launching our DDP workflow in August, at that stage, any researcher in the research community would be able to log on, create a project, and do a DDP workflow with their research participants. And we'll build into that a kind of what we're calling an ethics passport. So researchers would need to bring along to us an ethics protocol from their university. They'd log on to the AIO using their university credentials, provide us some information about their ethical protocol, and then under that protocol, be able to use our tools to do their research project. So certainly as we go along by the end of this year and then into the future years, more and more of the AIO's tools will become available to any researcher in the community to use at a kind of smaller scale or at a very, very large scale.
Great. And we've got time just to answer one more question, which is kind of interesting, is what kind of person agrees to donate their data? Is there a particular type that you've found so far? Yeah.
Yeah, Amanda, I'm happy to take this one on because this is a really good question. It comes up in perennially in data donation studies. I was at the data donation conference last year with a lot of European colleagues, and this is one of those perennial questions that comes up at those forums as well, because we do know that those who often engage in data donation are those that are from a particular very narrow demographic, usually from like a weird, they fit the definition of weird for those who know that. And so, yeah, absolutely, we need to make efforts if we're going to use these tools in research to try and make sure that the work, I guess, fits the particular context in which we're wanting to do it. And so, ensuring that, of course, it's not extractive, that we're taking account for data custodianship, the kinds of communities we would do this with and the ones that we wouldn't do this with is obviously very important. We're not pitching data donation as something that is a catch-all for everything and is going to replace all other forms of data donation. That's absolutely not the point, and should be what you take from this. So, but certainly there are well-documented biases when you put this out to a general public to say, hey, donate your data to us. You're going to get a very particular bias sample from that. And so that's why I think we would advocate for, like any other form of social science data collection, you need to put a lot of thought into specifically recruitment, to ensure participation is valued, that you think about if it's going to be financial compensation or some form of incentive. All those are the same questions that you would have with any other form of survey method or interview method as well. So the same goes for data donation. Please do not read this as a catch-all that is going to replace every other form of data collection. It is not, but it is a very useful tool in some contexts.
And I think for a lot of HAS researchers, who HAS researchers are really good at engaging with people from all aspects of our societies and cultures. Those methods of recruitment and engagement and participation, that we always use. I think that the lesson we're quickly learning is that we'll continue to use those methods with DDP approaches, so that the kinds of people we want to engage with, given our research questions and problems, we continue to engage with them like we always have. And then we ask ourselves, will DDPs or forms of data donation enable us to kind of have a richer engagement or a richer understanding about those people's experiences of digital platforms and services?
I think that's most of the questions covered.
Well, look, thank you, Amanda. And we'd really like to thank everybody who's joined us today for this overview of the Observatory. We hope it's been useful. We hope it sparked your interest, given you some ideas about the kinds of things that we might be able to do with these tools. As we've emphasised just in the last few minutes, we don't see these tools replacing other research methods, but we do see them forming a very valuable complement to the kinds of things that humanities and social researchers are already doing, especially when we want to know more about Australians' interactions with digital platforms. So a big thank you to everybody, a thank you to all of our participants, and please stay engaged. We will let you know when we've posted this video, and keep an eye on our website and social media. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again soon.